All right, let's jump right in. Today we're throwing on our historian hats to audit something really fascinating, the actual, on-the-ground, human cost of Rome's expansion across the Italian peninsula. When we think of ancient Rome, it's so easy to picture the shiny marble temples, the triumphant generals, and the map slowly turning Roman red. But history's rarely just about lines moving on a map, is it? It's about the people. So let's dig into this and look at the actual price paid by the everyday folks who built, fought for, and were ultimately absorbed by this rising ancient superpower. Just look at the sheer optimism in this quote. This is from a treaty signed by Roman leaders and their Latin neighbors down south back in 493 BCE. As long as heaven and earth endure. I mean, it sounds incredibly promising, right? Like the dawn of a beautiful, peaceful alliance where they all just band together. Well, spoiler alert, the reality couldn't have been more different. Instead of lasting peace, this era actually kicked off roughly 200 years of almost non-stop grinding warfare. Section 1. 2 centuries of war. So, our historical starting gun fires right around 509 BCE. That's when the Romans finally overthrew their last Etruscan king. They were basically like, okay, we're done being ruled, and almost immediately started pushing their own borders outward. Fast forward through a massive invasion by the Gauls in 390 BCE, which, by the way, we're going to dig into in just a second, all the way to 275 BCE. By then, their conquest of the peninsula was practically a done deal, leading to total control by 264 BCE. Think about that for a moment. We are talking about literal generations of people who grew up knowing absolutely nothing but war. During the 300s BCE, Rome was just aggressively pushing those borders. They fought a bunch of wars against their old rulers, the Etruscans, and various tribes living up in the hills. As they pushed south, it was a fierce, bitter battle against a people called the Samnites, and they even went head-to-head with some really sophisticated Greek city-states dotted along the southern coast. Rome was just systematically absorbing its neighbors one by one. Section 2, the turning point. Okay, so 390 BCE. This was a complete nightmare year for Rome. A band of Gauls, a tribal people from the north, sweeps down, absolutely crushes a Roman army, and attacks the city of Rome itself. Now, ancient Roman accounts will tell you the city was pretty much burned to the ground. But full disclosure, as historians here, we actually don't have any archaeological evidence of a massive fire. Still, the psychological scar, that was very real. They felt incredibly vulnerable. And that profound existential trauma forced Rome to hit the reset button, literally and figuratively. Step 1, rebuild the city. Step 2, build massive defensive walls around it so it never happens again. But step 3 is what's absolutely crucial for our story. They completely restructured their army. They permanently militarized their entire society to ensure they'd never be sacked again. And, well, before long, those Roman soldiers were right back out on the march. Section 3, the plebeian plight. So if we're really going to audit the internal human cost here, we got to talk about the plebeians. These were the ordinary, everyday citizens of Rome, your farmers, your tradespeople, the working class. Whenever you read that Rome conquered a new territory, it wasn't some wealthy elite politician out there swinging a sword. It was the plebeians bearing the absolute brutal physical brunt of all this multi-generational fighting. And the logic of it all is pretty inescapable. Because Rome's territory was exploding so fast, they realized they couldn't just rely on a part-time, seasonal militia anymore. To defend massive new borders and actually hold on to the land they just conquered, they needed a permanent standing army. And a permanent army demands permanent soldiers, which meant that more and more ordinary Roman citizens were being forced to completely abandon their farms and their families to go serve in the military for really long, grueling stretches. Now, as you might guess, this was not exactly a popular policy among the working class. Imagine being forced off to war knowing your farm back home might completely fail and your family might literally starve. The resentment this draft triggered among the plebeians was just massive. So the very people fighting to expand Rome's glory were the ones suffering the most because of it, sparking intense civil unrest right inside Rome's fancy new walls. It's this wild paradox, right? External strength being fueled entirely by internal suffering. Section 4, the conquered tribe's burden. Now, what about the people being conquered? Well, Rome's expansion was devastating for everyone else on the peninsula. Sure, Rome strategically handed out actual citizenship to a few defeated cities, but most faced incredibly heavy sacrifices. They were given strictly limited privileges, maybe just the basic ability to trade. Worse, these so-called Roman allies had to pay Roman taxes. And the real kicker? They were actually forced to supply auxiliary soldiers for Rome's armies. Rome was essentially using conquered people as a raw resource to fuel its next conquest. When you put these two groups side by side, it's a pretty bleak picture. On one side, you've got the Roman conquerors, specifically the plebeian citizens, being ripped away from their livelihoods to serve in a permanent army, causing massive economic anxiety and unrest back home. On the other side, you have the conquered tribes. They are stripped of their sovereignty, taxed to the gills, and ironically, forced to send their own kids to fight in that exact same Roman army. Citizen or subject, the Roman military machine demanded absolutely everything you had.
Section 5. The Price of Empire.
By the year 264 BCE, this wild transformation was complete. Rome now controlled the entire Italian peninsula. Because of this aggressive expansion and the way they essentially exploited conquered populations, Rome suddenly had more citizens and well-trained soldiers than any other power in the entire Mediterranean world. On paper, it's an absolute staggering success story. But as we've just seen, the people actually living under Roman rule, from the exhausted plebeian soldier to the overtaxed Samnite farmer, paid a profoundly heavy personal cost for it. Which leaves us with one massive looming question. Rome has essentially turned itself into this heavily militarized, permanently mobilized society just to conquer its own backyard. The plebeians are furious, the conquered tribes are burdened. So, if taking Italy caused this much internal unrest and human sacrifice, what on earth happens when Rome looks across the sea and picks a fight with an even bigger, wealthier rival? The peninsula is theirs, but the true test of this relentless machine is just over the horizon. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will leave you to ponder that one.